Good evening. Another Frankenstein tonight. This one, House of Frankenstein. And it does partly take place in Frankenstein's house. So, truth in advertising. Uh, we only watched one other movie, The Terror of Hallows Eve. Not even The Terror of All Hallows Eve, just The Terror of Hallows Eve. We watched it while we were cooking, and that is all that needs to be said about it. We also watched 3 episodes of Treehouse of Horror, and um, and I got my name mentioned on today's episode of Screen Junkies by asking what they considered to be the creepiest episodes or segments of Treehouse of Horror from over the years. So that's very nice for me because they're who I'm imitating by doing this. Um, the ones we watched tonight featured the Harry Potter one, one of the ones where Homer becomes death. I think that there are 2 where Homer becomes death, and Pierce Brosnan voices the house in one of them, a smart house, and so good time well spent watching the Treehouse of Horror. But the House of Frankenstein is what it's all about, and uh, we realized watching this that I think we kind of agreed that the Frankenstein movies, um, unlike the other, like the Wolfman movies, the Invisible Man movies, the Dracula movies, they make more sense to the extent that any of these movies and their sequels make sense. As far as building on what's happened before, the Wolfman continuing to be a character in Frankenstein's world, or Frankenstein's monster continuing to be a character in the Wolfman's world. Um, Unlike with the Invisible Man, you've got the Invisible Man and the Invisible Man Returns and related Griffins, but then you've got the Invisible Woman, completely outside of the realm of the Invisible Man world, and then Invisible Agent, which the guy is still a Griffin, but uh, it's a spy thriller. He's Captain America now, and and then back to vengeful people, but not related to the original Griffins, but still named Griffin. And so this with Frankenstein, you've got Frankenstein's monster is in all of the movies to some extent, usually a main character, and the Wolfman, when he joins the fun, um, is also a main character. Uh, but consistent characters because they cannot die, unlike uh, other characters in other movies that do die and are regular human beings, and so they die and they don't come back. Frankenstein's monster in this series cannot die. That is part of the lore. I don't know if it's part of the Mary Shelley novel. I forget that particular detail. And the Wolfman, um, I think I mentioned, I read in that little booklet over there, the filmmakers made up a lot of the lore when they made the Wolfman that has become associated with all werewolves. And so it's perfectly within their prerogative to make up that he can't die unless certain things happen, and he can come back to life if he seems to die. So it's fine, and it works, and it makes more sense as far as a continuous story, and it might be why Larry Talbot, played once again by Lon Chaney, um, is such a sympathetic character. Um, in a way, even though Frankenstein's monster has been a character in more movies, he's pure monster for the most part. They barely gave him the power of speech, and he stopped being particularly uh, relatable, and you stop. He's become less of a potential human being and more of a pure monster, and who doesn't speak and just lurches around and is a human wrecking ball. But Larry Talbot, Lon Chaney's performance, very very appealing. And when one of the characters, a new character, Ilonka, uh, played by Elena Verdugo, falls in love with him, you kind of see where she's coming from. She falls in love with him instead of the Hunchback character who is not the Hunchback. It's not Quasimodo, but it's a Hunchback, which is in as far as Universal movies I think was concerned is another monster. So this movie featured three monsters officially from who have had their own movies: Wolfman, Dracula, and Frankenstein's monster, and then the extra monster, the Hunchback. Now the weird thing about the Hunchback, Daniel, is that this movie doesn't feature anyone related or descended from Henry Frankenstein. It does feature the brother of Henry Frankenstein, who is, remember, Victor Frankenstein in the novel. That's the character. This does feature Henry Frankenstein's assistant, Fritz's brother. And Fritz was a hunchback. But the hunchback, Daniel, is not the brother of Fritz. The brother of Fritz is Dr. Niemann, who is played by Boris Karloff, who played the monster in the original Frankenstein movie and at least two of the sequels. And I can see why Boris Karloff didn't want to play the monster in this movie. The monster spends most of the movie, I'm guessing, as a life-size doll because he doesn't come to life and do things until the very end of the movie. And I can see why that wouldn't appeal to Boris Karloff. He instead turns in the performance of the actual monster, the character who does monstrous things, Dr. Niemann, who, like so many before him, is chasing Henry Frankenstein's work and success. And he wants to be able to, well, what he says he wants to do is he wants to play musical brains with the various characters and put, I think, the Wolfman's brain into the monster's body and put other brains other places. It's a continuation of what even though I like this series a lot, it's a continuation of what I like least about it, which is the idea that if you just put a different brain in, it'll be okay. And I guess the idea is coming from people who, by definition, you're not supposed to agree with their ideas or think that they're great ideas, but still, it's kind of poisons the whole idea of Frankenstein. Even Mary Shelley knew in the 1810s that that's not how brains work. And so that continues to bother me, but this movie had Dracula being brought from the dead in a semi-logical way. Dr. Niemann acquires Dracula's corpse, and unfortunately it's not Bela Lugosi, it is John Carradine, who is good, but not Bela Lugosi. And the way you bring Dracula back, apparently, is you take the stake out from his chest. And you know, it makes as much sense as anything in the movie. But it is kind of sad that Dracula is dispatched before he can interact with Frankenstein's monster or the Wolfman. But it is what it is, and it happens during an exciting sequence, or rather, it leads to an exciting sequence. So yes, the Wolfman still, and this is why he's so pitiable, still wants to be freed of his affliction, and he thinks by getting a new brain, he will be freed of the werewolf curse, which makes even less sense because if he gets a new brain in his body, it won't be him anymore, and his brain will be in someone else. And I don't know if the magic werewolf curse travels with the brain, and then Frankenstein's monster, this guy, if he gets the Wolfman's brain, does he then become a werewolf because the affliction, the magical affliction, is in the brain? I'm not sure. But it didn't matter because it was a fun movie, and then it was a movie with characters you cared about, like the woman who falls in love with Larry Talbot, Ilonka, who then she decides when he says, I'm a werewolf, and the only way a werewolf can die, which is what I want to do, is when shot by a silver bullet. She decides that and shot by a silver bullet by someone who loves him. And so she decides to be that person. And and yet the movie does not end, like so many of them did, with a tall man with a shorter woman in his arms as the sun sets, which I don't think is an appropriate ending for a monster movie. This has an appropriate ending for the monster movie, even though, as I've often said, that the Mummy movies become Frankenstein. This in this case, it kind of becomes the Mummy. Frankenstein's monster ends up doing something that the Mummy has often done in his movies, and so I guess they're kind of trading places. But it's fine. I really liked this one. Tomorrow is The Mummy's Curse, and I wonder how that one will end. Have a lovely midnight.